Hey folks, if you've been dying for a board game to break open, you're in the right place, since I'll be talking about Spiritle, a free-to-play digital tabletop title by Fabled Games, a studio I'm already familiar with since I am, as of this video, working on a review for their deck-building roguelite,
Pirate Outlaws.
Still, that does beg the question, is Spiritle a gateway to greed and gotchas, or a genuinely good game to grab? I'm your host Arlian, let's find out together. What better way is there to celebrate being freshly born into the world than to commit heinous violence at the behest of a chunky narcoleptic cat thing? While the details are more or less glossed over, you're essentially told that the only way for you to shed the trappings of your mortal form is to don the guise of a furry animal spirit thing and wage war against other equally fluffy spirits to reach heaven through violence. And honestly, despite how altogether terrible my explanation is, this winds up being a wholly accurate summary of the story, as there isn't a single iota of narrative elements to soak in or discover after the initial tutorial segment is finished. This means the full breadth of the experience hinges on its gameplay, and to a certain degree, it is conceptually interesting. Essentially, 4 animals are tossed onto a plot of land and tasked with brutally murdering each other, either in teams of 2 or in a 4-way melee. That said, the rules of engagement here are a bit quirky, and I don't just mean because it's turn-based. By default, each player can move twice a turn to any unflipped tile. Doing so reveals what type it is to all players and provides a token amount of gold. That said, if they can find a matching tile with their second movement, they'll get a larger chunk of gold and gain the ability to attack any player on the board. What's more, it grants a secondary movement phase, allowing them to further explore the map, generate gold, and feasibly attack again, though you're only eligible for a single bonus phase per round. While this sounds simple at a glance, there is a surprising amount of nuance to be found here, if only because of how different each character is, and I don't just mean statistically either. Each character has a set of abilities they can use during their turn, ranging from special attacks that don't require pairing to activate, or support abilities like damage shield, revealing land types, or even locking down titles so other players can't access them or take damage in doing so. That said, there are some fairly notable limitations there to help balance things out. Notably in the form of cooldowns and/or energy costs. Cooldowns, for instance, will gradually recharge, not by turn, but rather for every movement your character takes, which again heavily emphasizes pairing. There's also a handful with additional quirks, such as immediately recharging on pairing, or partially recharging when used to deal a certain amount of damage. And then there's energy, which simply builds up a pool with every motion you take, which can then be spent freely on whichever skill you'd like to channel at a given moment. Something which can be very powerful insofar as how flexible it makes your arsenal, though certain abilities, once again, may still be limited by cooldowns. It's legitimately neat, and one which, when paired with the character's passive abilities, allows each one to have a very distinct playstyle. Personally, I'm quite partial to Owlbear, whose passive gradually increases its attack power every time all the tiles are matched and the board resets, something which can escalate to some pretty ridiculous levels over the course of a pitched game. Still, there are some long-term strategic elements to manage other than just drawing things out to become uber powerful. Quests, for instance, are tasks you're offered at the start of the game, which challenges to do things like match specific types of elemental tiles or to pair to and around. Successfully doing so grants a substantial amount of gold, which can only really be surpassed by the boost you gain from finishing off a player. This winds up being pretty important, since as long as you have movement, you can visit the shop, eschewing the ability to pair a tile in favor of buying extra health, stat boosts for the match, or even acquiring a new quest to complete, or replacing a crummy one you can't. Honestly, as I gradually familiarized myself further, I began to get a decent feeling for when the best times were to make use of the shop, especially since its contents change depending on whether it's night or day. That's the only thing that changes during these phases, in fact. Still, as interesting as this all sounds on paper, Spiritle does rankle me to a certain degree for a number of reasons. First off, there's a tiered talent tree, which rewards players with permanent stat boosts for all of their characters. This is a bit of a problem though, because it's not a system that you can freely fiddle with in order to tailor your character, but instead gated behind the Golden Acorn system. Golden Acorns are acquired from playing matches where you're given 25 for losing or 75 for winning. Here's the thing though, while some of the talents are subtle enough, like the health boost only increasing your health by 2 points, others are very noticeable, such as the gold generation bonus more than doubling the amount of money you would gain from pairing tiles when it's maxed. Likewise, the trap, attack, and skill bonuses can also significantly ramp up players who have spent more time in the game, essentially tilting the odds of victory in their favor to a fair degree and punishing newer players to the game. And then you factor in the accessories you equip before the battle. While you do have a ring that grants you plus 7 health by default, again, you can spend golden acorns to get a ring that boosts your attack even further, for example, just to help hammer home the potential power gap. Really, the only thing that stops this from being a pay-to-win experience is the fact that you can't spend real-life money on buying acorns and are simply expected to grind them up. And it is a considerable grind given the matches last a good chunk of time for a very minimal reward. For instance, for each fresh board that is made or that is remade, there is a deployment phase where you place your characters around the board. These can wind up somewhat lengthy as players occasionally try to strategize where to go. Here's the thing though, there's barely a point to this since it's almost never a good idea to place your character adjacent to another. There's no benefit to landing on a specific tile during deployment, and given you can freely swap your character with another by clicking on them or move to any tile, the actual act of manually placing yourself down feels moot. Nothing would be lost by just randomly plunking down players on the map, albeit ensuring that a single space always exists between each one. That said, since it was something I had to endure, I made good use of my time, which brings me to the second point of all this. Spiritle, at the end of the day, is in part a memory game. It is a match too. While there are strategic elements to the actions you take, so much of it hinges on you remembering where things are. Here's the thing though, I have a memory impairment. It's a whole thing. If I'm not clearly staring at a spot or singing out the tile names in order while pointing at their locations, I'll immediately forget which ones are which or entirely misplace them. So I instead stacked the odds in the other direction, making grid maps of the board at the start of every round since the turns are lengthy as heck, and keeping track of all the potential matches as well as mapping out where I should optimally move in order to best figure out which ones are missing was, yeah. I imagine this partially subverts the spirit of the game, but then that is a weird element here. Memory or excessive note-taking are practically fundamental things of its design that can shift the balance of this game to such a large degree that, again, it's apt to bar some people from enjoying it or to lopside the odds. I don't know, I'm comparatively far less bothered by the character selection. The default characters are fairly decent, and given they each have a solid array of abilities you can mix and match, you can make them fairly flexible insofar as long-term strategies. So while you can use golden acorns to unlock another cohort of characters, it doesn't feel quite as bad to miss out on them. Though, again, it would still require a sizable amount of them, thus requiring me to forego any long-term scaling from the talent tree or equipment if I got them first, and, just adding on to the total amount of grinding the game expects from me if I want to experiment. Like, I recall that there was a sizable amount of grinding to do in Pirate Outlaws, the other game of theirs that I'm currently playing, in order to unlock things, but this just feels painfully slow. Really, the thing I'm least bothered by is, surprisingly, the in-game cash shop, which is purely dedicated to cosmetic items. I mean, I guess the season thing is alright, since there wasn't a season pass to expedite the horrendous amount of grind. At least the only prize I cared for, the extra acorns, was a low-hanging fruit that was very easy to get. So, you know what? Let's just change the subject to one that's actually pleasant, because at the end of the day, I can say I wholeheartedly enjoyed Spiritle's visuals. The character designs are quite nice to look at, and I genuinely enjoyed the boards, so by the point you invest a good chunk of time into the game, you're likely going to be looking to improvise your own music. So yeah, that's all the fine points, so let's wrap things up nicely. And simply put, at the end of the day, Spiritle is conceptually an interesting idea, but one that is slow, grindy, and also feels weirdly punishing at times and very lopsided, especially for the amount of effort you can put into a match versus what you get out of it. Let's say you get focused down as a fragile character by everyone picking on you, and are rapidly killed over the course of a few rounds, letting you bow out of a match in something like 7 to 10 minutes. Well, that's about it. You can either choose to spectate the rest of the game or surrender, and you'll immediately cash out your 25 acorns. On the other hand, let's say over the course of a long 40-minute game, you gradually outmaneuver and personally kill 2 of the other players, endure several board flips, get so many pairings, and then finally get put down. 25 acorns too. The overall length of the game can just drag on, especially with the shop allowing you to get health, and with nothing to help mitigate overall game length by instituting some form of sudden death, or events like that can help to influence things, or even just to have large contributions to the flow of the game feel meaningful and recognized, it all simply boils down to 1 winner and 3 losers eating dust, with the longer-lasting losers simply getting a raw deal. Factor in all of my other gripes about the mechanics, and even though I have friends that are willing to play this with me, even though this is free, I'm not overly sure I want to invest any sort of time playing this. While there are certainly interesting ideas at its core, again, the skill and passive system actually feel fairly good, it's surrounded by an experience that felt tedious. Also, the fact that I need to watch the map like a hawk for every action the other players took meant I could never really step away to get a glass of water without potentially falling behind, which feels like it sort of detracts from the somewhat casual nature of many board games. So yeah, I ultimately didn't find this game very fun. I think it's intrinsically flawed, and I would have rather spent my time playing another digital board game, like a certain furry regicide simulator game that I may have already reviewed. So yeah, this game's a fail in my book. I'm sure someone out there will likely get some enjoyment out of it, appreciate it, but I just can't. That said, while my review of Pirate Outlaws is far from over, it's not out there yet, I have been having a substantially better time with it, so I'll definitely give Fabled Games credit on that front. Anywho, thanks for tuning in. If you have something to say, leave a comment, and if you enjoy my efforts to create new indie reviews and interviews, hit subscribe. For a link to my Discord, the Crit Hit Cauldron, check the description. There's also a link to my Patreon if you want to see reviews early or just want to support the channel, and to my merch house for neat swag like Crit Hit coffee mugs. That said, I'll catch you on the next episode of Crit Hit. Take care till then, folks.